All right, well, I think we should just go ahead and get started. So hello, thank you so much for joining us this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Karina Hendren. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Associate for Global Stakeholder Engagement at Out and Equal. To start off, I just wanted to share some logistics. This block will run for an hour. We're gonna take the first 30 to 45 minutes to go through some discussion questions with the panelists, the amazing panelists that I have here that will introduce themselves shortly. And then we will take questions from the audience in the final 15 minutes. So if you'd like to submit a question, please do so throughout the session using the question and answer box. That way we can see those. And we look forward to your questions, and we appreciate any questions that you may have for us. So earlier this year, I had the pleasure of working with Interweave and Pride Circle on a resource titled The Intersections of Mental Health and LGBTIQ People in the Indian Workplace. The resource, while optimized for the current COVID-19 context, provided an overview of relevant statistics, some best practices and case studies, as well as tips on how managers can support their employees, particularly at the intersection of mental health and LGBTIQ identity. And in this panel, we have some of the authors of the report, as well as mental health practitioners and corporate representatives, and where we will go into some greater depth about the importance of navigating this specific intersection. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our panelists for them to introduce themselves. Meliner, why don't you go first?
Great. Thank you, Karina, and good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be a part of the Out and Equal India Virtual Forum. And I'm delighted to be speaking about this topic, which I'm personally very passionate about. So by way of introductions, I lead the diversity, equity, and inclusion and the mental health strategy for Northern Trust in India. I've been with Northern Trust for the last 3 years. Apart from this, I'm also Global D&I Advisory Board member for the Future Talent Council. And I've contributed to a lot of research in the diversity and inclusion space. When it comes to mental health, this is something, as I mentioned, I'm passionate about. I'm a certified mental health first aider by MHFA England and MHFA India. And I do a lot of work on mental health within Northern Trust and outside of Northern Trust, both in India and globally. And once again, I'm truly delighted to be a part of this discussion. Thank you, Karina.
Sure. Thank you so much. And why don't we go to Ram next?
Hi, Karina. Hi, everyone. A very good day to you, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining in. I am Ram. I'm co-founder of Pride Circle. My pronouns are he, him. And I also identify as a gay man. And mental health, particularly in the context of the pandemic and what it has led to, the lockdowns and the news of the illness, loss of life, and all of that has been very traumatic for people. I think it's important that we are able to have that conversation and address mental health and build opportunities of mental health resilience. So we're really delighted to be part of this conversation, and we'll share more about what we do in the space later. Thank you.
Thanks, Ram. And to you, Manisha.
Thanks, Karina. Hello, everyone, and good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are as appropriate for your time zone. Thank you for this opportunity, Karina, Out and Equal, for me to be here and participate in this conversation to share and learn and grow along with all of us here today. So my name, as Karina said, is Manisha. I'm based out of Hyderabad, and I'm here as a part of Interweave Consulting. Interweave is a leading firm in the space of diversity and inclusion. In fact, one of the torchbearers here in India, does a lot of work in the space of women leadership and all aspects of diversity and inclusion. I am a psychologist. I have my master's in psychology. And over the last 20 years plus, I have been associated with almost every aspect of learning and development. Practicing therapist, certified and professional from REBT from Albert Ellis Institute, New York, as well as been a part of working with organizations delivering EAP services, especially counseling, mental health across corporates, plus my private therapy. So I guess pretty much every aspect of work and therapy somehow touched or has been a part of my life. I'm really passionate about mental health and more from the perspective of wellness and how we can kind of live better. And that's what I'm here for. Let's see how we can engage and contribute for our learning together.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. So now we'll just hop right into some of the questions that we have for today. So the first question is, how has COVID-19 impacted mental health in India, particularly for LGBTIQ people? And I will start back with Manisha.
Right. So thank you, Karina. So I think, when it comes to COVID-19, one of the things we can kind of look at is the fact that it has impacted every person because it's changed the way we are living our lives completely. It was like an overnight change. And a lot of these sudden changes and shifts in itself create a little bit of mental disturbance for people. There was one particular study conducted by Suicide Prevention India Foundation based out of Bangalore, which reported that there is an increase in self-harm, increase in suicide ideation amongst the people since the pandemic has, kind of taken over our lives in the last few days. There is an increase in anxiety, job stress in general. If you look at isolation, um, strangely, we've always been connected virtually before and more connected now, and yet there is an increase in loneliness and a sense of isolation. So when we're talking about these conditions, I'm saying that over and above all of these situations that everyone is facing, there is that increasing stress or increased stress on the LGBTQ plus I community. I would say that there is one of them being that there is a concern about there are a number of people and families who aren't really very accepting or very supportive, in which case people are feeling even more trapped and closed into their spaces. It's not always a loving and supportive space that greets people who have not yet made peace with their own self sometimes, or are still looking at how to come to terms with their own, orientation. So along with the stress that identity and identity formation creates on a person, there is this whole stress of expression of that, which earlier would be happening probably outside in friends and maybe in close circles and sometimes even not there, right? So this forced being close is leading to a stress. Now, this is on what I'm saying is on the negative side. On the other hand, what we've seen is there's an increase in number of people seeking help. Definitely, the therapy seekers have increased, and they are from all walks of life. I would say the younger people are much more open to it. I have seen there is higher fatigue. I mean, personally, I'm speaking, and also there are studies which pretty much correlate. So on the other side, there is also the fact that because of this pandemic, there is an overcoming of fear, stigma to seek help, which we are seeing. Couple of situations that I've personally dealt with where this forced closed spaces have led to a final resolution of some people being able to speak out and not really denying or walking away from the spaces. So I think there is, a more of the negative, I would say, impact from the fact that masking of identity, being in closed spaces, that's affecting everybody. And on the other side, like I said, there's one bit of positive that there are more people reaching out for help. And push it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Manisha. Melanie, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think, Manisha has covered it all very coherently. I just want to add that if you look at us as human beings, right, we have so much of intersectionality of our identities. You can be a woman, you can be from the LGBTQ community, you can have a disability. And even before the pandemic, people were struggling with this intersectionality of identities, being accepted for who you are. And during the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement, all of this has just been, the whole pandemic has upended this problem to a greater extent. So if you're struggling to be, let's say, a woman and from a minority community, then the discrimination or the marginalization gets even bigger. Now, when it comes specifically to mental health and the LGBTQ community, I think, what the first thing that comes to my mind is that people from the community have been, moved away from their community, from where they find, especially the transgender community, from where they find a lot of solace, voice, and personal support. And many of them have to, continue to stay with their families. Some of them may not be out to their families. Some of them might be abused by their family members and their loved ones. So this has really heightened the problem, not just for the LGBTQ community, but for all minority groups. So that's really what I wanted to add, Karina.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Ram, is there anything that you would like to add?
Hi. I think a lot has already been talked about it, so I'll just cover on some of those points, which is particularly around the intersection of the identity as an LGBT plus person and mental health. One is about either job loss or because of reduction in your pay, people have been forced to move out of their current and move back to their hometowns or stay with parents who are not necessarily very supportive of their identity. And this could be like for cis LGBT people, the renewed pressure of getting married because now you're in their face all the time. You don't have that distance of running away to different city or just that constant pressure of their marriage has come back. People who are gender non-binary or trans people and again not accepted in home spaces have constantly been triggered by being misgendered and called the wrong names, being dead named, and also the little expressions of being yourself, right? Which could be just wearing something like a small rainbow badge or painting your nails. All of that has been taken away because you're now under a microscope and people are watching you closely every day. So the amount of triggers people are facing has definitely increased much more. The other aspect of it is obviously around what the larger population is facing around loss of livelihood, around being in a lockdown in a non-supportive space where either friends, family, coworkers, whoever you're staying with, are not inclusive, and your safe spaces have been taken away. So earlier you could just go through the week because in the weekend you're going to meet your friends, you're going to go to support network, you're going to hang out with people where you can be yourself for a little bit, and that little bit has also been taken away. There has been attempts to replicate that in virtual spaces, and great work has happened in that space, but has not really come to a space where it kind of works the same way as you can hug a person and have that conversation. So I think that has taken a toll, and the aspect of suicide ideation, which Manisha talked about, has definitely increased. Hence, we also did a series of workshops with suicide prevention in the foundation. We also did some suicide gatekeeper training so that people who are the first gatekeepers who can identify symptoms of suicide ideation and be act as an intervention and talk to that individual and help them guide them to find resources for support.
Great. Thank you all for your answers on those.
One last point I want to add
Oh,
about the
sure.
particular
Sure, sure,
community,
sure.
which their entire livelihood was based on going out of work, which is around the trans community, a section of the trans community who will rely on begging and sex work. Now that has completely been taken away because, and then there is no other resource to support you. So people actually had to struggle for basic food and survival. And this has been great to see many organizations stepped in, both NGOs and corporate partners, to distribute food and other things which were required by the community.
Great. That's a great bit to add. I think I'm glad that you added that, Ram. So the next question. So we've kind of heard a little bit about some of the ways that how the pandemic has impacted mental health. So what are some maybe practical steps that managers or others in the workplace can do in order to better support the mental wellness of their employees? And I will start with Melanie first on this question.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sorry,
You have a little bit of an echo.
yeah, is this better?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, and I think, Karina, could you just repeat the question because I lost you in between?
Sure, sure, sure. So the question is, what are some practical steps that managers can take in order to better support the mental wellness of their employees, essentially?
Yeah, and I think the first thing is very top on the list is empathy, because you really don't know where people are coming from in terms of their situation and their background. The second thing I think is, as human beings, we all come with our own set of biases. We are very judgmental, and we make assumptions based on our own experiences. We tend to criticize, and as a society, not just in India and globally, we haven't accepted the possibilities of failures. We haven't seen vulnerability as a strength. So when people tend to lose there's a drop in productivity or absenteeism, or people are tearful at the workplace, the first thing is, look, go and pull yourself together. Now, when you meet with an accident, and let's say you break or injure a part of your body or break a leg, you don't tell somebody, go and pull yourself together, right? So why do you do that when somebody is experiencing a mental health condition? So the first thing I think would be empathy. The second most important thing is the power of inclusive language and the power of words. Words are so powerful, words have vibrations. So when you tell somebody who's going through, let's say, a series of mood swings, you turn around and say, oh, you must be bipolar, unknowing that bipolar is a serious mental illness. The person just could be going through a bad time. So I think the important piece is, how you approach these conversations, listening with empathy, being not judgmental, and listening, really developing the art of listening. And if you feel that the person in your team or your colleague is experiencing a mental health condition, you could refer them to professional support. I think the most important thing for managers is, people tend to call themselves counselors if they've done a short course somewhere. Counselors can only listen. But a mental health condition can only be diagnosed by not even the psychiatrist who gives the medication, by a therapist. So the most important thing is for managers to learn to draw and respect boundaries of what I can and cannot tell my employee. So I just summarize again. I think empathy, listening not judgmentally, respecting boundaries, and practicing, the power of inclusive language. That's what I wanted to add.
Great. Thank you, Melaner. Ram, would you like to add anything?
So I would say that I think the first step is recognizing that mental health is real, and they need to take care of that. Like, just recognizing that there could be people who look physically fit and fine, but they could actually be battling with a lot more which they're not able to share and talk about. I think having that, building that culture where you can talk about mental health is very important, right? It's, and I draw it to a lot with the LGBT plus inclusion journey. Like, when we don't talk about LGBT inclusion, the stigma and the amount of stress LGBT individuals go at the workplace, it's very similar for mental health also. When you cannot talk about it because people around you don't understand the concept, people around you think that, okay, calm down, it'll be fine, or just like, just chill, it'll be fine, right? People give you unsolicited advice which is just not helping you, and there's no one who actually understands what you're dealing with. So realizing from a manager's perspective that it is important that this is real and this impacts the workplace, and it is also uh, and obviously they will not be experts at this, and this is not an expectation. The expectation for them is just to be that bridge who can a support their employee and connect them to the right resources, which could be EAP services within the organizations or experts outside the organization. So it's more about building a safe space and a culture where you can talk about mental health, and are aware that, okay, if someone is taking a day off because of mental health, it's okay. Not penalize the individual for that, and not stigmatize the individual for talking about that. I think that would be a great start for managers.
Awesome. Thanks, Ram. And I wonder if maybe you could share a little bit about the case study that was in the resource that I'm about to put in the chat now. But I think if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, I think that's a really great example of a manager supporting their
Absolutely.
employee.
Thank you. So encourage everyone to read the report which Corina is talking about, and the case study where this is actually a very beautiful example of what a workplace can do with little sensitivity. So there was this incident of an employee who identifies as a gay man, and he was having like a really hard time, and then the manager was able to see that they're not being themselves. This person is a little down. Like, what happened? So the manager pulled this person and had a conversation like, hey, is everything okay with you? I feel like there's something wrong. You can feel free to have that, let me know what it is and if I can help you in any way. And the person came out to the manager that I am gay, and just very recently I came out to my mom, and there's been a lot of pressure at home to get married, and they are not understanding, and just like I'm not in the right mind space right now. It's just taking a lot. So the manager supported the individual, heard them out, and said, "Hey, probably you didn't know that we have a really amazing employee resource group. Oh, and you can definitely feel safer at the workplace. And if you want, you can talk to people who are from the community and would be happy to help you, mentor you in this journey. While it's a personal challenge you're facing, there are people at the workplace who have gone through similar journeys and be able to coach you through that." So the manager connected him to the EAP program, and the person found some safe space at the workplace. There were more people who have been through the same space. Now, the other thing which also happened, that because it's a little more serious than just coming out to the parent. So they also connect to the EAP provider so they can seek professional help. Uh, and the third amazing thing which happened was one of the members of the ERG uh, really helped the individual and actually talked to the mother as well. Like, hey, and was able to connect the parents together so they can have a conversation separately. While this is not completely like a work-based responsibility and onus of the manager to get things done, but in a way, like when you have these resources available, when you can just play the role of connecting the dots, you can make a big impact to the individual's life. And that is at that point of time, that is what the individual needed, someone who would understand and connect them with the right resources. And that completely transformed what the experience of the individual had at the workplace and in life.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Ram. I think that's a really great story and a really great example of how all of these things connect. So, Manisha, is there anything that you would like to add?
Yes, thanks, Karina. I think great points, Melina, Ram. Thank you so much for sharing those points and insights. I think a couple of things that I would add to bring out those points is that relationships are not built over, over seconds. It's something that you build over a period of time. So managers do need to regularly invest time for the people to see them as supportive. One thing that I would say is that don't mix conversations. If you want to really, when you want to support employees, don't mix conversation. If you're having a feedback conversation, have a feedback conversation. If you're touching base with the person to have a general communication, do that. I mean, I think we all know that when a meeting starts with how are you doing, the answer is I'm doing fine, and then we'll get down to business. Right? So we have that dual nature of at workplace, which is of a relationship and one-to-one or an individual connect and the work connect. So ensure that you're keeping those two connects separately. The fact is that the environment outside, the world outside is right now a little hostile. We are, when we go out, we are really careful. We look at everybody with a bit of a suspicion, and in the sense that we want to be safe, we want to maintain the social distance. Now, when you're on that kind of an alert mentally all the time out there, and consider the fact that if people at home also are feeling, like we spoke in the earlier situation, if they're not feeling accepted or finding a space for expression, um, masking or wearing a professional mask at workplace is also another mask, right? So create some spaces where there is a more informal interaction, like Ram was mentioning earlier, where people could meet. Now, though you can't meet, a manager can create spaces for a little bit of a team lunch, like you have your lunch and I have my lunch and we talk about something. One of the things that has worked well with is something that a manager did about shortlisting a movie. Everybody would come up with a movie, watch in their own time. They would get back together and discuss. Now these kind of interactions and sometimes help you to loosen up and also gain a perspective about each other, that can then lead to deeper conversation. Extremely be mindful of the boundaries. Okay, I think this in Indian context, we are very collectivistic and tend to sometimes forget that while our work family is a great, it's another family, we do have to respect boundaries. So that personal and professional boundary, not coaxing or pushing people to speak, but creating a space and an environment that builds trust. I think that would be the best way that you could look at supporting mental wellness. We also know that mental wellness comes from wellness around us. And that means that feeling of trust, feeling of connect, feeling of being productive, and all of that contributes to our wellness, right? So even at work, if you find that there are certain deadlines that can be managed, don't be unreasonably demanding. In that way, you can support the wellness of your employees by not being unreasonably demanding about the deadlines, unreasonable meeting times, and all of those things. While they are not directly talking about mental health, but better work practices which communicate that I care and respect your personal space and time. I care and respect to create a productive time, create a rest and rejuvenation time, communicates a deeper sense of connect and care for the employee, and sets up the stage for all those direct conversations and for them to happen. I would say if you're listening and someone has opened up to you, it's respect the fact that they trusted you to open up. Please don't intensify their emotions by labeling too many things as terrible, horrible, and awful. Because if you're not equipped to deal with, as a mental health professional, like Melina was mentioning, if you don't know how to deal with it, don't intensify, refer them out to the right people. At the same time, what Ram was mentioning is don't be dismissive, don't be minimizing their emotions and feeling and saying that, you know what, it'll be all right. And please, please, please never do this one thing, which is take off on your own story of how you dealt with a difficult time and how you overcame, because it often seems like invalidation of feelings for the other person. So I think those are some of the things I would say that as a manager you could do. And if you're not comfortable with something, if you're really not made peace, like say I could be going through depression myself about or a loss in my personal life. And if someone's talking to me as a professional about grief and loss, I might find it very difficult at that point of time, even as a trained professional, to deal with it. So at that point of time, be in touch with your own self. If you think that you can't take it, don't get into it, refer it out. And there are, reach out and seek the right way to address that part. I think that's what I have to say.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn back to Ram, who mentioned this a little bit in his what he was previously saying. But so how does stigma impact mental wellness and create those barriers for people to either talk about it or to talk about it with others or even to go seek help? And so what are some ways that we can support others to decrease that stigma?
I think stigma plays a very big role, and it ties back to the whole aspect of whether it's an environment where I trust, where I feel like people have good intentions, people uh, want to know the story because they care about me rather than they want a piece of gossip about me, right? I mean, that is what makes a difference. It's inherently psychological safety we're looking at. Whether do I feel that my team has my back or not, right? And the aspect that why imagine sometimes imagine if you like why am I being asked to do so many more things? I have to deliver on a timeline and do this project in time. Now also have to take care of mental health, because at the core of it, at the core of a workplace, are employees. If we don't take care of the people we work with, then we cannot work, right? And hence, and also the other part is like your manager and team members could be few people you interact with most regularly compared to other people. Like even some people may not even be talking to the family every day, and to other friends, especially in the lockdown and the pandemic situation. So they have become the first touch point. And how you stigmatize or destigmatize a topic is simple, like whether you discuss this topic, right? Or whether we just talk about mental wellness as in a casual conversation or not. Whether when someone talks about that, how you respond to that, right? Whether you dismiss that emotion, say, hey, you're thinking too much, or oh, just calm down, this will be fine. Or you say, hey, this, thank you for sharing that, right? This is really important, and I feel great that you shared with me. How you approach that conversation. The expectation is not for you to be the solution provider. The expectation is not that I have to come back and give an answer to that question, but rather a space where you can talk and then say, hey, I know someone who went through this, and this is the counselor they reached out to, or they seek professional help, and it's okay to do that, right? I think destigmatization also comes from visibility, and a lot what we do for LGBT plus inclusion, when we talk about why is it important that we wear a lanyard or a badge or we have visible ally programs, is because as an LGBT plus person walking into that room, I know that there is conversation happening about this, and I can talk about this, and hence the onus of being LGBT plus is not on that individual, but that conversation can happen with the DNI team, with HR team, with other people who are aware about the terminology, the vocabulary about it, and what questions to ask. The very basic sense of sensitization around LGBT plus inclusion. I think I can draw a very straight parallel on mental health as well. Whether as an organization, are we visibly talking about mental health, right? Are we uh, providing spaces and building vocabulary within the organization so people can understand, even if I know that someone is having a mental health challenge, how do I talk to that individual, right? What language to use when I try to support the individual? What kind of vocabulary should I use to say that I'm being supportive and I'm here for you, right? So I think it's important to bring visibility and conversation on the topic and provide people with the resources so they feel enough visible markers are there that this is a safe conversation, a safe space to have this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ram. And Melanie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Karina, I mean, what Ram said was absolutely, spot on and fantastic. The way I look at stigma is, if you look at mental health, it's on a spectrum. On one hand, you can be mentally well, and on the other extreme, you can be living with a mental illness. And at the same time, or let me put it again, you can have a severe mental illness and you don't have a severe mental illness. And on the other side, you can be mentally well and be mentally unwell, which means that, let's say, if you are diagnosed with a severe illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and you are on your medication and following what your doctor advises, you can still be mentally well and lead a normal life just like anyone else. Now, on the other hand, you can have symptoms of a mental health condition like, let's say, anger outbursts, consistent periods of sadness. Now don't get me wrong, all of us feel sad from time to time. It could be for various reasons. But if it is consistent and you don't feel like doing anything, that could be a second symptom. A decrease in productivity, you've lost a loved one, coping with a personal traumatic event. But you don't get help, or you live in denial, or you feel that I'm okay, I'm brave, I'm strong. So you can be mentally unwell without a diagnosed mental health condition. And I see that, they say 1 in every 4 lives in a mental health condition. I think it's going to be even, the numbers are going to be even larger as we move forward. People aren't aware, and people don't want to talk about it. They live in denial because of the stigma. How can I have a mental health condition? Why should I go to a psychiatrist? And if you look at historically, homosexuality was considered a mental illness before it was removed from the list of mental illnesses. And as a society in Asia, not just in India, we live in a collectivist society. So there's a lot of focus on groupism. What will others think? There's reverence for the family. There's reverence for my manager at the workplace. And there's this whole concept of self-preservation and saving face, particularly in a collectivist society like Asia. So I would rather live, with my mental health condition than talk about it or seek help for that sake of self-preservation or saving face. And I think one of the ways, to deal with stigma is showcasing role models. So if you look at world over, you see that celebrities and people who've done really well for themselves live with the diagnosed mental health condition. And having these people talk about their experiences gives you a message saying, it's okay to ask for help. I'm not particularly fond of this saying it's okay to be not okay, because who defines what's okay and not okay? But I think talking about it, sharing experiences, and talking about mental health in the same way as you talk about physical health, to me, are some of the ways in which you can tackle the stigma. So that's what I wanted to add, Karina.
Great. Thank you so much. And before I turn it over to Manisha, I just wanted to make a shout out just to remind our listeners to add any questions that they might have for the panelists in either the webinar, in either the chat or the Q&A. But now I'll turn it over to Manisha in case she would like to add anything.
Sure. Thanks, Karina. Adding on to the points about stigma, I think I think it's any kind of stigma impacts health in general, mental and physical. And I think in this case, when we're talking about mental health, there has been this history around our nation where we epitomize, or we kind of glorify strength and courage, and our ability to take and handle pain and to put up with uncomfortable situations. We've definitely come through very difficult history. We are still overcoming a lot of challenges financially. I think the emotional shifts that are happening. So I think we've got to look at, when we glorify all of these things, right? This ability, just don't bother, it'll go away. What is this? I handled this, I handled that. When we do that, we actually discourage people from acknowledging that it's human to be weak, it's human to need help, it's human to be at times not be able to deal with what you're dealing with, right? We deny a certain part of natural expression when we glorify one aspect. So I think that one of the ways, I'm talking about actually straight away going to the support, what we can do is remove the shame. And how do we do that is by one of the organizations that I'm working with, unlike most EAP organizations where they say that it's all, what should I say, anonymous, they have it an absolutely open forum where people can reach out. They have open groups where mental health discussions happen. They even allow a mental health off in case somebody needs that for some reason, for what they are going through. So it's a very open and acceptable part of it. I do know that there is a concern around that as well, because what if people misuse that? What if people really are? But something, I think that's a very, I don't know, I don't even know how to answer that question, because in that comes from a space which does not recognize mental health or needs of emotional needs at all in a person. So if we have to decrease the stigma, we have to become more open. We've got to shift our conversations about um, health in general. And I think I like the point where Melina mentioned about not jumping to, oh, this is OCD, oh, this is depression, not generalizing use of mental illness or those jargon just for any and every situation, and creating further confusion, because then people just don't know. When they're dealing with real depression, they end up saying it's not, right? So no one chooses to be depressed. Okay, it's not a choice. No one chooses to be in that space. And if we can acknowledge, accept that, deal with empathy, I think we can move towards decreasing that stigma. As far as the barrier that it creates, I think Ram spoke about it quite in detail, and I'll just reinforce that one point, is that if I know that you don't believe in what I believe in, how am I ever going to even open up and share? I may not even want to have a discussion. And that also comes from a bit of the way things are around here. If my seniors don't, I know their views and they're very strong views about something, then juniors and other people will not even put forth their honest views if they find it's a conflicting view, right? So um, the stigma can only be removed if we change the whole dialogue and narration that we carry about mental health. And like Melina said, mental health, physical health, health in general, both are parts which we've got to give equal weightage to.
I just like to add to one point about the destigmatization part, and not necessarily from a workplace perspective, but generally. So the pandemic has forced a lot of mental health professionals to come to social media, which was not a very common practice earlier. And the language and the tonality and the conversation, like the memography has happened, right? People have started talking about mental health in memes, and that has made that conversation accessible and shareable with people. So I can share a meme about it and very well be talking about mental health and then bringing the spotlight to the topic. And hence, you'll see a lot of Gen Z and millennial people are much more open to access and seek support because they don't see us as a stigma because there is enough conversation about it. So I think even from workplace perspective, we have to see how do we communicate about these topics, how do we make it an engaging content and say, hey, it's just another topic we're talking about at the workplace.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Ram. And then next, another kind of really important thing is making sure that people have ideas and have ways to take care of themselves. So it would be great to hear, and we can start with Manisha this time around. What are some different ways to practice self-care, particularly during these difficult times? I know it's often hard because, and sometimes people's self-care is going out and talking with people. So, and that's something that they can't really do, at least not face to face and in that sort of way. So I think it would be great to hear from everyone so different ways to practice self-care, particularly during this COVID-19 context.
Sure. So I think the first thing that I'd like to say about self-care is the word that when you say self, the first person who's got to be there for you is you. And if you can be there for everyone, but you are not there for yourself, then that doesn't really work, right? So if you can start seeing that the one person who's going to be with you forever till you go away is you, you definitely look at prioritizing self-care. And it doesn't have it's not selfish to put yourself ahead at times and to put yourself ahead of yourself at all. If you take care of the basics, I always believe that I think basics is where if we put it right, a lot of things just fall into place. And the basic things, first, when we look at it from the physical needs point of view, getting adequate sleep, adequate and right food, and the right exercise. And in these times, a right exercise can also be simply going up and down the stairs in your house or walking outside or finding a safe space for a little bit of that exercise. I have found myself with all this working at home, I have found myself enjoying my alone walk time. And I have always disliked exercises earlier. I did not much enjoy them, but I found that that was my space that I could get when I could just go out by myself and take a little walk. So sometimes creating that little space for yourself in whatever way you can so that you can be you, right? It can be, and fine to do that every day. Don't wait for it to build up till a point where it's like, no, I need to get out of here right now. I have to find something. So an everyday simple routine works. If you're doing, if you're sitting for long hours, just get up, walk around for a couple of minutes, take a call while walking. I know it's difficult at home and you might not have that complete space, but whatever little you can, do that. That's one thing. Reaffirm to yourself that at times, things like, okay, I'm figuring out what my identity, I'm figuring out what I'm going through, I'm figuring out how to deal with this. Acknowledging and reaffirming what you're dealing with goes a long way in mental health and especially taking care of your mind. Denying, not looking at it, actually pushes you more towards anxiety and rather avoidance, which are really not healthy ways of dealing with issues. So self-acceptance, connecting with nature, even if you see that little piece of sky, a little plant or little something that you can connect with, something so timeless, something which gives you a sense of connection, like that, even if you don't have people, is great. And for those of you who have pets, God bless you. And I think that's one unconditional space that can always add to your self-care, right? So I think I'll leave it to the others, and in case there is some time, I'd come back again and add a couple of points. I'd leave it to maybe Ram and Melina to take it from here.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Manisha. Melina, if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Before the pandemic, I would often hear people saying, I just went to do some retail therapy. And when the pandemic started, the whole definition of self care changed. I think self care is really, really important for everyone, whether you are experiencing or not experiencing a mental health condition. Just talking to people, what we see more and more often is people suffering from issues of low self esteem and not having dealt with it. So when it plays out with their relationships, with how they react at work, with what they feel about themselves, this has a huge compounding effect on their mental health. And the second piece is on self talk. What are you telling yourself? So I think these two, for me, are crucially important when it comes to self care. So I'll tell you some of the things that I, sort of practice is positive affirmations, and positive affirmations, go a long way. Because if you look at it from a scientific perspective, your brain is like a sponge. It is absorbing what you tell the brain or what the brain hears. And the beauty of the brain, irrespective of your age, is that the neural pathways, and this has been, a fact of neuroscience, can be rewired or reframed. And that's the essence of what cognitive behavioral therapy really does. So it's a lot about self-talk. It's about positive affirmations. Mindfulness is amazing, but it's really difficult to practice. Being in the minute, and even till today, when I'm having my breakfast, there is this tendency to look at my meals and saying, "Oh, what's the work that's come my way for the day?" But if you can practice mindfulness, it's really a beautiful tool for self-care. It's great to just learn to be. It helps deal with stress. It deals with anxiety. And the I think the interesting thing now is there are so many apps available, for mindfulness, for meditation. We talk about physical gyms. We should actually look at a mind gym, which is what we've done in our organization. So even just doing a 10-minute meditation, just reflecting on your own breathing. And the other two elements of self-care that I would add is kindness and gratitude. Kindness and gratitude go a long way in increasing the positive chemicals in your brain, like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. I read a book a couple of years ago on gratitude, but never really practiced. And over the last couple of months, I've been maintaining a gratitude journal, and it does wonders for your positive well-being. And I think even an act of kindness, it doesn't have to be something monetary. Just picking up the phone and asking someone, "Hey, how are you? How's your day gone so far?" Or sending an elderly person some food. It sort of makes you feel so good. So, like I said, self-talk, affirmations, mindfulness, meditation, gratitude, and kindness is really what I would add to my bag of, emotional resilience and well-being when it comes to self-care. And I love the point that Manisha made about, if you have a dog. So I don't have a dog, but I have a whole bunch of strays, and they do wonders for my, my self-care and my well-being. So 100 marks to that point, Manisha. I just love it. That's what I had to add, Karina.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was able to be home last month with my mom, and she has a little dog. So that was like, obviously, it was great to spend time with my mom. But another great plus was that I had a dog that I could pet, and she's a little Chihuahua looking dog. So she's like always on your lap, and it did wonders for me for the month of November. Yeah, Ram, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think wonderful points have been shared already by Banisha and Melna. I'd just like to add two more to that. One is our inherent need to connect and the need to be validated is so important for all of us. So it's important that while we need to socially distance, we need to be physically distanced from people. I think it's important that we still build that connections with people. It could be just a simple, you pick up the phone and have a quick conversation about people and caring about other people, right? Just because at the end of the day all we want to do is be felt understood, be felt that there are people who care about you, there are people who mean something, and that building that digital safe space, having that conversation, continuing that safe space from the physical to the digital world, I think it's important to take time out. And while despite everything tells you to, maybe you don't feel like pushing yourself to go and have that conversation or join a safe space meeting group or go to a it could be a lunch meeting with people and you don't feel like, but you just go ahead and do it so that you build that community so that you don't feel isolated, that you are alone and you have to be fight all your battles by yourself. And bunch of other things which already covered. One would be like, especially in a space which is hostile, especially it could be a home with friends or family or anyone where you don't have space for self-expression, you don't have space where you can dress the way you want or can do talk the way you want or whatever else. I think it's important to build a safe space. It could be just in your washroom. Lock yourself for 10 minutes in the washroom and say, I am fine, it's a safe space, and practice something what you enjoy doing, right? It could be just the way you look at the mirror and talk to yourself or any of that. Like, it's important to build some safe space in our entire day, that there's some period of time you feel happy, you feel connected. And the rest others I've already added about meditation, walking, having a pet and all of that.
May I add one more thing to this, Karina?
Of course.
So I think, the word that has fascinated me in this whole journey of learning and self-care and all is something, I advocate a lot, which is developing your own self-sufficiency or a kit. So on one side is our need, human need for connection, and on the other side is our human need for individuality and identity and our own self. And we constantly pulled between those two. And while we can do and seek a lot through connection outside, the connection within, with ourselves, with our higher selves, with our inner selves, the spiritual aspect of it is something which often is um, more a source of peace and more within our frame of control. And when we are talking about the environments being hostile or the families not being supportive, or sometimes like the world really not feeling very safe at this point of time, we've got to turn a little more inward to start looking at really having some constructive and positive coping skills. Some of the ways in which we negatively cope with stress is by increasing intake of alcohol, or sometimes it's increase in anger and abuse and shouting. And on the other hand, if we process our emotions and look at what are my, positive coping of whatever challenging is going on. And I think in that, have a healthy mix of what I can get from others or how I can connect with others in meaningful ways, but how can I also connect with my own self? Right. So I think that self sufficiency, if we start looking at, allows us to enhance the resilience that Melina talked about, right? Recognizing that you are enough. And if you can be there for 100 people, you can be there for you as well. I'm sure we've all been great friends to others. Can we be that for ourselves? Now, I think that that's something I would say in terms of self care, that you could put that in place as well for you. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all so much. I think um, what's left is just to maybe have each of you go through some kind of closing, any kind of final wrap up concepts or ideas or things that you wanted to get through. And I think one thing that's been on my mind is kind of a lot of times it's often difficult, like if someone comes to you and says that they're going through an issue, like maybe what are some of the things that you can do to immediately support them, or some resources that they can access in the workplace or not in the workplace. So and whoever would like to go first, I know that that's just a question that I thought of as I was listening to you all.
Hi, this is Melina. Karina, I think I'll go first.
Sure.
Just listening to everything that's been said today, which is so relevant, and thank you, Ram and Manisha, for sharing your individual perspectives. As we move forward, I think it's important, and I'm talking about one of my favorite authors, Brené Brown, to embrace being vulnerable. And as we move forward, I think vulnerability is going to be a core trait for any good leader. So the more we, share, talk about our authentic selves, what we're going through, and especially in a society like India, where boys are brought up to be tough, they're taught that it's you shouldn't cry, you should be bold. They carry these stereotypes and biases with them when they grow up, and put on using the word a mask or a veil, and dealing with deep issues of insecurity and self-esteem, not wanting to show their true feelings or being guarded, until there's one day boom and there's a sort of an emotional outburst. So if we can teach, my takeaway is, if we could teach our children and the future Gen Z, the importance of being vulnerable, and it's okay to speak about what you're truly feeling. I think that's going to be the core, or should be the purpose of all of us in the corporate and in the larger communities. So these would be my takeaways.
I think, especially in the context of intersection of LGBT plus identity and mental health, I think it's important to build your family. A lot of us may not be in a position where there is love and acceptance at homes we are born into. It's important to distance yourself from negative people, because while acceptance is important, you cannot have everyone's acceptance. You cannot have everyone on your team. So it's important to know who is with you and who is not, and build those distances from people who are negatively impacting your physical or mental health. It's important to build a tribe and family of chosen family of friends and people who understand you, who get you, and who are there for you. Because we all need that support network, right? At the end of the day, we look at what are we fighting for. Once we are fighting with our families for acceptance, and then we're fighting with the world for acceptance, and there's just too much of fighting going on, and there needs to be a space of love and care and celebration. So I think it's important that we consciously build those spaces, reach out and find ways to build that network of people who really gets us, understand it, and there's a celebration in life, because you can only fight so much. And the second thing is, because of the identity shame and stigma around the LGBT plus identity, a lot of LGBT plus people push themselves really hard to perform well. So at least, because a part of the community feels like being LGBT is a certain disappointment to the family and XYZ, and hence I'm trying to compensate by doing well in my professional career and various other spaces. I think it's okay to not, it's great that to be ambitious and really work really hard to get where you want, but I think not because from a reason of a space that you're less than anyone else. I think as an individual, everyone is enough and they're great. Doing things for the right reasons and not because of trying to compensate for your identity would be a great start too.
I think I'll quickly add to that. Ram, you stole my line from my mind. The one which was going on right at the top is that, you know what, we've got to start saying to ourselves that you are enough. I am enough, right?
Yeah.
I'm enough, absolutely. And unless we start from that space, and Melina spoke about positive affirmations, and I would say that start affirming your own self. Our approval, self-approval, self-acceptance, and is extremely important. Self-love that we talk about, right? And self-love is what? It's just about accepting who you are. You're no more and no less than anybody else, right? If we can start practicing certain positive, empowering statements and integrate them into our belief systems, and these are not something just you're saying to make yourself feel good, but that's just how it is. Not, I mean, we are no better than and no less than anybody else. We all individuals, we human beings, that's just the way it is, right? So starting from learning how to give yourself those positive strokes, learning to be there for you, approve of yourself, practicing all of that kind of would go a long way. Look, there is prejudice, there is denial of human rights, there is harassment, there is rejection from family and the world and everywhere. Why would you do that to yourself, right? So start with ensuring that that one thing is in place, and then from there look at changing or impacting one person at a time and build your tribe. Like Ram said, a family is who you choose your family to be, not necessarily just the family of birth. So I guess that's what I would have to say, and as my closing point. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been fantastic. And yeah, I wish we could talk for another hour. But unfortunately, our time has come to an end. And please, and thank you all to the participants for joining in this session. Please remember, in 15 minutes, the next block will start. So please join us for another session soon. And thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ram, Melina. Thanks,
Manisha.
Corina.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Melina.
everyone, for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a good day.
Good day to everybody. Bye-bye.